I had 3 different experiences over the last 24 hours. I want to talk about all 3 of them. They are individual experiences. They're disparate. They are not intrinsically related to each other. But I want to comment on all 3 of them. And I'm going to relate them to one another, find a common thread that ties them all together. It's really going big, right? No, it's this one. That's the fan. Can you reach that high?
No, it's
Okay. You just maybe turn that down or turn it off. I don't think we need it. It's not that hot in here. If it's super hot, you're probably wearing a jacket. You just take it off. There you go. All right. I'm just going to start again. I had 3 experiences in the last 24 hours. I want to talk about all 3 of them. Normally I don't do this. I'll be a little more, systematic in my thought process, and I'll pick one topic and explore it. But I really wanted to comment on all 3 stories. And they are 3 unique occurrences that aren't really intrinsically related to each other at all, but I'm going to relate them to one another. There is a common thread that I'm going to force into all 3 of them. And if I do a good job, it'll seem like it's being revealed that there is inherently a connection between them. I'm not sure how forced it is. We'll just sally forth and see what happens. First thing is Varangi and I were talking today. Can I just go ahead and talk about what we talked about? All right, I got permission. So she doesn't really have a choice because I didn't ask her ahead of time. It's how I roll. Remember that when you share something private with me? No, I know the things that should and should not be shared. This is a shareable moment. Varangi, when she first came to the U.S. 23 years ago, when she was maybe 11, with her mom and dad, there was a family friend, Paola, and so, which is Paula in Spanish, real common name in Colombia, Paola. So she was 10 years, 12 years Varangi's senior. So she was in her early 20s when Varangi was adolescent, 10 or 11. And she was also from Colombia, and she became friends, and almost like a big sister to Varangi, who's the eldest in her family of 2 kids. She became like a big sister and ended up marrying Varangi's middle school teacher. So that's how, she was take her to school, met Varangi's middle school teacher. They ended up getting married, and they were married up until last week, had a kid together. Paola got cancer in her mid-40s and just passed away last week. So they were friends for 23 years since Varangi first landed in the U.S., and she just suddenly passed away, leaving behind a husband, Varangi's old middle school teacher, and an 8-year-old, super sweet kid, Patrick. And Varangi's pretty broken up about it. So Kanai, Varangi's doting husband, called me up today. He's on a 10-day freak out fighting a wildfire in Bakersfield. Going big, sleeping out in the bush, cutting fire breaks, like real serious stuff. And I wasn't able to get off work, and it's just been, they sort of, I don't know what it is, but they commandeer you and make you work 20, 30 days in a row if they have to. That's just part of what it means to be a forest firefighter. So, Kanai called me and said Varangi's really broken up. She also dropped a water bottle on her toe, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but I think, was it one of those flasks? So she dropped some sort of 50-pound weight on her toe and exploded her toe and is bleeding ridiculously. They both sent me pictures of it, like I want to see her gory, mangled toe. Like Kanai sent me a picture and I felt obliged to look at it. I looked at it, I was all grossed out, wanted to vomit. Then Varungi sent me the same picture as if I hadn't seen it already, and I had to look at it again just to make sure it was the same shot. So Varungi was really broken up. Literally, her toe was broken up, but figuratively, she's really broken up over the death of her family friend. They weren't super close. Since Varungi became a devotee, they faded away a little bit from each other, but they saw each other every couple of months. She would come over to the house. She was still super close to Varungi's mom and dad, and so it was a big blow to the family. So I said, Varungi, what are you upset about? And she said, oh, there's just a lot of things going wrong in my life. And so her toe was a big deal for her. It's actually not a big deal. She was making a big deal out of it. And then, Kanai's out of town. That was a big deal for her. It's actually not a big deal. The big deal is her friend of 23 years died suddenly, prematurely, leaving behind an 8-year-old. That's the big deal. How do we know that's the big deal and not the other two things I mentioned? How can I arbitrarily tell Varungi that the other two things that she told me were a part of the problem are not actually part of the problem? How can I do that so, I don't know, confidently, unilaterally, with such absolute surety? Yeah.
They came up.
No. Yeah. No. I don't know what that means. Yeah.
If her friend didn't die, the other two things wouldn't be a big deal?
Maybe, maybe not. We don't know. Yeah?
Kanai's coming back and tells him to heal.
Huh?
Kanai's going to come back and tells him to heal.
That's the permanent thing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you guys are onto something. I would frame it a little differently. Here's how I would frame it. How shallow and petty and stupid and immature would Varungi have to be to equate a stubbed toe with the death of a lifelong friend? How pathetic and materialistic and narcissistic and foolish and idiotic would Varungi have to be to equate her husband being a few days late coming home from work to the death of her friend? The death of her friend is a huge deal. It's permanent, it's also huge. I might permanently get my ear pierced. It's not the same as the permanent death of my family member. You follow? And so permanence doesn't always mean, there can be something which is small but permanent. There can be something big which is temporary. But there's big items which warrant you being disturbed by, and there's small items which don't warrant you being disturbed by. You follow? Like, I don't know, I'm bald, okay? My hairline has permanently receded in a massive way. You follow? But then a loved one of mine, trigger warning, might get violently raped. Should I be more concerned about my permanent hair loss than that temporary crime they suffered? Yes? You're nodding your head yes. You just nodded your head yes. Be careful when you nod your head yes. Should you be as disturbed by more disturbed by the permanent thing than the temporary thing? No. So it's not permanence versus temporary. What is it?
It's more gravity.
Yeah, more gravity. It's like you want to not use the correct language that I already handed to you. More heavy. What? More severe. It's big versus small. Stubbing your toe is small. Your husband being a couple days late for work is small. Are they big? They're small. Death of a loved one is huge. Big versus small. Right? You could use other language. But why? I gave you excellent language to use to really get to the bottom of it. Just copy me. What do you have to say?
It's big.
Do you agree? I'm trying to help you guys get it. So Varungi started giving me a bunch of stuff that just wasn't so important. And if you want to help somebody, you got to learn to recognize when somebody's giving you decoys, when somebody's giving you small stuff, when they don't want to get to the heart of it. Because when we get to the heart of it, then what does she have to do? She has to confront her actual feelings, and we have to deal with them. So what they do, they try to throw out decoys. So you don't have to think about the big thing by making a small thing a big thing and wrapping it all up into some kind of gumbo, some kind of smorgasbord, so that it's just a bunch of things so you can't get to the bottom of it and actually resolve the problem and talk about the real thing that needs to be talked about. Did you guys follow that? Who does this? Who does this?
What I do.
Who does this? Everybody does this. So if you ever want to help anybody who's not super in touch with themselves, in which case probably they're helping you and not the other way around, people are going to try to muddy the water. And your first order of business is to create a hierarchy and understand what's really bugging them. And force them to look at what's really bugging them. Does that make sense? So we did that. And I got a lot of ground I want to cover. You guys are really making me move at a snail's pace here. So let's everybody try to wake up because I got a lot of ground I want to cover. You losing weight? You're looking good, man. I got a lot of ground I want to cover. So let's all pay attention, okay? So we got through the non-issues to the real issue. Next thing I said to Varungi is, what bums you out about the death of your friend? She also gave me a bunch of decoys or small stuff. I forced the issue. I said, does it remind you of your own mortality? Now, to be reminded of your own mortality when a loved one dies, is that self-absorbed and semi-narcissistic? No? I think it is. And because of that, nobody wants to admit that that's actually bugging them. You see somebody else die and you think about yourself. Is that selfish? It is. It's self-absorbed. It is. It's also natural. And so usually people don't want to admit if they have selfish thoughts because it's low class, because you should be thinking about the other person. So then they're not going to talk about it. But then if it's bugging them, it's going to sit there like undigested food in their brain and they can't get it out because they think it's inappropriate. So what do you have to do? You have to bring it up on their behalf and say, that must have reminded you of your own mortality. Did you guys follow this? It's something else you do if you want to help somebody. You bring up uncomfortable topics that they're not going to be able to get to because they're uncomfortable, and you say it on their behalf. And you open that door so they can talk about that. It's wrong to be self-absorbed to such an extent that you can't think about somebody else. To think about somebody else and yourself is just to be normal. Do you guys follow that? So we got a little bit into that. And she was bummed out that she didn't take an atheist / lapsed Catholic and force her to chant Hare Krishna the last 20 minutes of her life or something like that. She felt like she hadn't done enough to shamelessly and boldly force Krishna consciousness onto the family in their final moments, right? And what was my response to that? Everybody's afraid to comment now. My response was, I would really get upset if some Catholic came into my home and tried to force their spirituality on my wife when she was passing away. I would find that to be highly inappropriate. And so she put a little Gunga Jal on her. She chanted to her. It was a good vibe. Wasn't too pushy. I think Varangi did marvelously. And she said, let that go, because there's always more you could do, and it's never enough, because they're gone forever. You follow? Then we got to the real thing. After we got through all of this stuff, then she hit me with something real. She was like, she didn't quite say it like this. I'm being slightly hyperbolic. But she said, I don't like Krishna consciousness because we're supposed to have these loving, deep, meaningful relationships. At the same time, we're supposed to be detached when people die. It doesn't make any sense. And that's what I want to talk about. I don't like Krishna consciousness because we're supposed to have these deep, loving, meaningful relationships, and then people die and you're supposed to just be detached. How would you handle that doubt? By the way, the premise behind the doubt, what's the premise behind the doubt? Yeah. I mean, that is a premise. That wasn't the major premise, but it's kind of a side issue. But that was cute. You're kind of cute. Your little earrings and your witty, detracting statements, tangential statements. What's the real core premise behind the philosophical problem she's having? Yes, sir. All right, so on one hand, you're supposed to be detached, and on the other hand, you're supposed to have deep, meaningful, loving relationships, and those two things are antithetical to one another. They're mutually exclusive because detachment and deep affection are opposites, and therefore we're recommending a contradiction, and therefore it's a contradiction and doesn't make sense. So the premise is detachment and deep, meaningful relationships are at odds with one another. Did you follow that? She said, I don't like this whole thing, it's bumming me out. But what she pointed out was what seems to be a contradiction. It seems to be a contradiction because she thinks these two things are diametrically opposed to one another, or at the very least incompatible with one another. Are you guys following this? Once you know the premise, then you can start to address it. How would you address it? How would you counsel somebody who hits you with this? Yeah.
I would challenge the premise because I don't think that that's true, that you can, they're diametrically opposed, but I don't know how to strongly make the argument for why.
Okay. So basically you said, I would challenge the premise because that's the hinge of the whole argument. I just don't know how to do it. It's like saying, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God. You're like, I prove God exists to you to challenge your premise that there's no God, but I don't know how to do it. So although I'm glad you raised your hand, you didn't actually contribute anything to the conversation. How would you counsel somebody? Come on, guys. Moderate.
I might try saying that fully love someone and also have the wisdom and understanding and broader perspective to see that this body's temporary. Just hold both of those.
You can love somebody in a powerful way. Is your t-shirt nude?
No, it's yellow mustard.
God, my eyesight is going. I'm like, is she wearing a pair of overalls with no shirt? It's like, whoa, dude. Like, button up that sweater. I think the point you make is excellent. I went about it a little differently. Deep, meaningful relationships are not materialistic relationships. You cannot be materially attached to people and also detached. Being a devotee means that you have adopted a higher sense of what's going on. You see people as spirit souls. You see the bigger picture. That is actually the way you view the world. Therefore, your deep and meaningful relationship with somebody isn't a hopeless material attachment that gets completely wrecked when the person dies. It's something more than that. It's something more than that. And therefore, it can survive somebody's death. And it's not that everything is for naught, and everything gets eclipsed, and everything gets crushed by someone's death. For example, you could be in the military with somebody. This even works if you're an atheist. You could be in the military with somebody, and your friend, your colleague, when you try to get into gender neutral language and you try to never use the term brother or sister, it becomes problematic because brother or sister indicates intimacy in a way that friend or comrade or any other term in the English language does not. And so although the language is gendered, to say your sister in the military or your brother in the military communicates this bond that's almost familial that you feel with people that you live and die with and serve a higher cause with. And there is actually no other term of endearment in the English language which quite communicates that. You follow? Which is why you say brothers in arms. Sisters in arms less common because 99.9% of people who've died in battles traditionally over the course of the entire history of the world have been male. But you could introduce sister in arms. There's nothing wrong with that. But you've got your brother or your sister who you serve with, and they die nobly in the service of a higher cause. And although you may miss them and lament them, there is something beautiful and sustainable and higher that remains because you lived and died for something you value. This happens when people have a higher sense of purpose than just hanging out and eating paellas or whatever it is people are doing. You know, it's like a higher sense of life. Do you guys follow this? So, it's true that if you think a deep, meaningful, loving relationship means a material attachment, an unbridled material attachment to someone's body, that's not superseded by and informed by a deeper sense of what's going on in the world and a higher sense of purpose, you are right that detachment and a deep, meaningful relationship in that sense would be incompatible. So what I did was I attacked the idea of a deep and meaningful relationship because she clearly did not really mean a deep and meaningful relationship. She meant a material relationship. And by introducing what a real deep and meaningful relationship would look like, then the contradiction is revealed to actually just be a paradox, which is an apparent contradiction, which isn't actually a contradiction upon inspection. You guys following this? So I went in the direction you went in. But I took an extra step of pointing out what it means to be deep and meaningful and what would actually lead to a contradiction and what wouldn't. Which was a challenge because Varangi is actually a devotee. Sometimes when you grieve, you forget that momentarily for a second. And you need someone to remind you of who you are so you can rise back up and be the lion that you are and not the lamb or the sheep that you're feeling like momentarily. That's one of the things that devotees do for each other. We remind each other, hey, don't forget who you are. Don't forget what you stand for. Don't forget what you live for. Is this making sense to you guys? Okay. So, and then, you got two ways it works. A, I have a spiritual relationship with Narayan. We are part of the same tribe. We have the same values. We both have a higher sense of what human life is for. We have the same spiritual expression. We speak the same language, follow the same process, have the same value system. Our relationship in powerful ways transcends time. In powerful ways. And it's reciprocal. We feel the same thing. So long after he's gone, as I live according to the values we share together, I feel connected to him. And as I remember him and the life he lived, I feel inspired, and that connection remains potent forever. Do you guys follow this? Did that make sense? Yes, you. Did that make sense, what I just said? Okay. Option 2. Narayan and I are not members of the same tribe. We don't have the same value system. Let's say Narayan is like a Skid Row, wino, barbecue eating, just mongrel. I can still bring that magic. It's no longer reciprocal. I can't reflect back on his life and find inspiration. But I can import into our relationship, unbeknownst to him in many ways, my value system. And I can live according to my value. I can see him as a spirit soul who went as far as he could in this life, who died of cirrhosis of the liver from drinking too much or whatever it might have been, who missed out on some opportunities. I can learn lessons from that. I can use that in my own life to fuel me. But it's one way. I'm bringing that to the relationship. It's unstoppable. If you become a spiritualist and you live a deeper life and you walk the road less traveled, that colors and informs and uplifts and deepens all of your relationships, even with people who don't share any of your values. Then we talked about this, and she was satisfied, but then she let out one more. She gave me another piece, because we got past all the decoys. We got to something real, and we talked about it. Then she said, but I'll never see her again in that form. And this is something I have a lot of experience with, because a lot of people I've loved have died. And I'll never see them again in that form. Because she only knew them through that form. That's a natural emotion. And to the extent that you are materialistic, you won't be able to get over that. And that's a symptom that your attachment to them was not purely spiritual. To the extent that you deeply embraced our tradition, you will be able to, in a mystical way, still remain deeply connected to them as a spiritual being. Even to know that is ennobling and empowering. Even if you're not there yet, knowing that, working that out, thinking that through has great value, because it shows you how far you have left to go. It gives you hope for the future, and even contemplating that might actually elevate you to another level, and you can upgrade. Do you guys follow this? Okay. Number 2. And this is something that I don't generally speak about, because I don't think most people are able to follow it. And it's somewhat intricate. But I was talking about this with Shri yesterday. And so I want you guys to really pay attention now. That was number one, a little story. It's about life and death, balancing your thoughts about yourself with other people, getting around decoys, actually helping people, filling in the blanks, differentiating between the big and the small points in life, understanding what it means to be a spiritualist, letting that wash over you and help you grow and inform the way you live and the way you think. And using these experiences to deepen things, take yourself to another level. That was like number one experience. Number two is, yesterday I was talking to Shri on the phone, and the specifics of our conversation are less important. But I explored a topic with her that I'm not even sure she followed, although I said it like 8 times in the conversation. I'm not even sure she followed it, but maybe she did. But I want to say it to all of you guys, but I don't have as much time as I had yesterday to get this in, so please everybody listen. This same principle that you can bring the magic and somebody else also is at a higher level, then that magic becomes synergistic and the relationship becomes really potent. This principle works across the board in your life. It works across the board. We talk about the value of selfless love. It's a huge trope and leitmotif of our tradition that comes up all over the place, everywhere. We talk about selfless love, selfless service, doing things without any expectation. It builds on the idea of detached action where you do the right thing without the result, duty-based ethic, the first teaching of the Gita. And then when you add theism into the equation, the idea that we're all eternal beings, it becomes bhakti and this selfless service to the divine and also to all humanity with no expectation of return. But there is a natural contradiction in this. And that is that reciprocal love is also beautiful. When you meet somebody who can actually reciprocate with you and share your values and be available to you in the relationship, such relationships are infinitely more rewarding. When you deal with somebody who's fundamentally unable to reciprocate with you, or they're unwilling to reciprocate with you, it's an unrequited love type situation. That's nowhere near as rewarding for people as when you engage with people who love you back and who are there for you too. So this selfless love thing seems to be somewhat inherently contradictory. It contradicts our basic experience of the world and relationships in the world. Did you follow that? And so in the same way that Virangi thought deep love and detachment were incompatible, I'm making the point that selfless love is incompatible with the reality that reciprocal love is higher. And in fact, when we think of the zenith of potential love, what is the zenith of potential love? It's Radha and Krishna's reciprocal love and our participation in a reciprocal relationship with Radha and Krishna. They give us their prasad. We render various services. They appreciate our services. And so when we look at the models of love in this world, we value reciprocal love above unrequited one-way love. Isn't it? That would tend to create a contradiction with the idea of selfless love as being supreme. I think I'll mention here at this point that our sacred texts also speak of selfless love and reciprocal love, and they value both, and sometimes they criticize reciprocal love as being mere business. And so our scriptures also speak of both these points, and therefore they enhance the contradiction by speaking favorably about both things, and also by criticizing selfish love and glorifying selfless love, but at the same time also glorifying reciprocal love. Did you guys follow that? And as someone who takes our sacred literatures to be revealed, revelatory, revelation, which means I feel like our sacred texts were given by God and therefore represent transcendence in a written form, creating a bridge to this world to allow knowledge from that dimension down to this world as an act of mercy by the divine. Then resolving such contradictions for me is part of my service. I spend time thinking about these things because I'm a faithful member of our tradition that continues our texts to be revelatory, and I worship them and read them in a worshipful mood. And if I find a contradiction, I spend time thinking about it because I want to resolve it. Did you guys follow that? So that was me problematizing things. Same thing. She had a contradiction. I now have a contradiction. And I think the same method works to resolve my contradiction as well. What is the method I've introduced to resolve her contradiction, which also works for mine?
The difference between a spiritual love and a more superficial.
Yeah, but I mean, let's just think about it. If I selflessly love you, spiritually, do we glorify that? In our scriptures? Yes, the answer is yes. If there is selfless reciprocal love, do we also glorify that? Does the very idea of reciprocal love indicate that it's not absolutely selfless because there's some reciprocity? It does. That's the contradiction. Do you see the contradiction now? Do you see how what you said doesn't resolve it? But I did introduce a methodology for resolving it already into the conversation. It's one of the things I used to resolve her contradiction at the end to make it real easy for you guys to remember. Does anybody remember what it was? That's okay, because I'm going to repeat it. Let's listen up, though. Here we go. If you love someone selflessly, that is a beautiful thing. If they reciprocate with you and love you back selflessly, that's synergistic and creates unlimited possibilities for depth and spirituality in a relationship. If they're incapable of reciprocating, your love is still magical and wonderful and brilliant. And your selfless love does not depend on their reciprocation. It blossoms in the presence of reciprocation, and many wonderful things come out of it. And the movement grows and blossoms like a lotus and unfurls and enraptures others and becomes very attractive. And you create a movement of people who are cultivating such love, and they become the most attractive force in the world. And that's kirtan, a bunch of selfless people loving together in the vicinity of one another. But if somebody is unable to participate, or if they participate for some time, or you go away, or if they have what's called pratibimba ratyabhyas, they seem to be reciprocating, but they're not. They're really just reflecting your light. They're basking in your light, and they appear to be participating, but it's not actually theirs. It's yours, and you sort of infect them temporarily, like a reflection in a mirror. Did you guys follow that? Like some people come into your group, they hang out with you, they buy all the, like they buy the neck beads and the japa bag, and they're wearing a dhoti, and they shave their head, and they seem like a real devotee. You're like, oh, you're one of us. But they're not. They're gone like 3 months later. But they wanted to hang with you, and so they adopted some of your mannerisms, and it looked almost like they were one of you, but they weren't. You know people like that? Why do you know people like that? Why do I look at Braj Kamud and say, do you know people like that? And not all the rest of you? Because he's a leader. He's a missionary. And he's attracting people. And then sometimes those people seem to be getting it, and all of a sudden they're gone. And you're like, what happened? They're like a hot dog at USC, and you're like, what happened? Right? And you think to yourself, how could we came together. How did you go? Right? Anybody who's done serious outreach and helped people, they'll have experienced this many times over. The more outreach you've done, the more times you'll have experienced this. They were reflecting your light. They were basking in your light, but it wasn't theirs. We want to make it theirs, but it takes time for that spark to catch for them and for it to grow into their own flame. You follow? That's the goal. Someone becomes a devotee for life. They bring their own light, and then they give that light to others, and it's transmitted like that. But whether somebody's incapable of reciprocating or whether they reciprocate for some time and walk away, your love still reigns supreme. Your love is still magical. Your love is still powerful. Your love still brings light. And a lot of times we get seduced by the dark side. Just like Varangi. She loved this person in a spiritual way. She has a tradition she's a part of. But that idea of losing that body is rough, and it reveals her remaining materialism. That it's a real obstacle. It's not just something that's part of the package and you have to learn how to let go, but she's like, no, I want her back in this form, in this way, and it's tough to let go, right? That reveals her materialism. It's not a bad thing. She's young. She's in her mid-30s, no problem. She's got some time left to figure it out. Similarly, if you think you have selfless love and someone reciprocates and then they stop, or they seem to be reciprocating and they stop, and you become bitter or resentful, what does that prove, Mason? That your love wasn't so selfless after all. You follow? But this works. You embrace selfless love, selfless service as your ideal. You cultivate. By the way, this is for intermediate devotees, for people who have already accepted the value of selfless love. This is an intermediate level contradiction which is being resolved. The first one I mentioned was an introductory level issue, paradox, which is being resolved. This is a medium level. It's for people who've already become devotees, who've already understood the value of bhakti in our tradition. You cultivate selfless love. When people reciprocate, you guys move mountains together. When people don't reciprocate, you're moving mountains on your own. If people reciprocate for a time and then back off, then you are moving mountains together and you go back to moving mountains on your own. And that the depth of your realizations of spirituality are tested when people leave this world. And the depth of your selflessness is tested when there are betrayals, or when people walk away from the tradition you're part of, or when, things get reversed on you. People drop off, give up. If you give up, or you become bitter, then you weren't so selfless after all. Do you guys follow this? To nuance it a little bit more. You can love up, love equal, or love down. Let's start with the one that you all have experience of. You love up. Somebody helped you. In our case, they made you a devotee. You have an unrepayable debt to them. Is your debt selfless? It is not. It is intrinsically forever linked to what? Huh?
Something they did for you.
To what they did for you. They helped you. They gave you something more valuable than life. A value system, a revealed tradition. They revealed it to you. They opened your eyes to something far beyond what you ever would have figured out on your own. You owe them for life. You think, I owe you for life. Chakudan Dilo J, the one who gave me eyes. Jamme Jamme Prabhushe. He is my Prabhu, birth after birth. Prahlad Maharaj, Narad Muni opened my eyes. I could never give up his service. Prabhupada quoted that in his prayer on the Jaladuta when he was coming to the U.S. My guru opened my eyes, how could I ever give up his service? He quoted the Bhagavatam in his own personal prayers as to why he was getting on a boat at the age of 69 to travel for 40 days to come to the U.S. with no money because he had a debt to repay because his guru had told him to come to the West and spread Krishna consciousness, and he felt that obligation for 45 years. He was told that when he was in 1922, when he was 26 years old. And 43 years later, he finally made good on his promise when he was 69. Carried it with him his whole life. The fact that you can't get around the cause of your devotion towards your elders when you love up towards your elders is precisely why we think of Krishna as a child and forget he's God, so that our love can become more natural and more spontaneous and less intrinsically linked to what was done for us. Do you follow that? Our whole Yoga Maya, loving Krishna as a child, that whole thing is an attempt to subvert in divine madness, Divyonmada, in divine madness, this natural reality that somebody did something for you, you can never get around it. If you love God as your parent, you can never forget what they did for you. And therefore your love is always linked to their first action. That's okay. Now you love amongst equals. Then you're walking arm in arm, helping each other along the way, carrying that burden together, one foot in front of the other, scaling the mountain, taking the journey of a lifetime, taking the hero's journey. They have similar values as you. You came together. You walk hand in hand. You get strength from them, they get strength from you. You listen to them, they listen to you. You help them, they help you. And those relationships are incredibly rewarding and necessary. That's a love amongst equals. Amazingly, that runs the gamut. This is platonic and romantic relationships are all included within these three. A romantic relationship is always between equals. Platonic relationship can be loving up, loving equal, or loving down. And this encapsulates all potential relationships between people. But if that person drops off and you resent them, or you're angry, or you're bitter, or you can't forgive, or you can't let go, then what does that prove? That's right. That's okay, but that's what it proves. What should happen is that if somebody doesn't reciprocate or drops off or whatever the case may be, you should just go back to benevolence and munificence and love them regardless. And therefore selfless love can be glorified and reciprocal love can be glorified, because the two are not actually contradictory if the reciprocal love is simply two selfless loves coming together, as opposed to a materialistic love coming together with another materialistic love, which depends on that reciprocity and that business-like relationship, and that's what's criticized. And that's why our tradition criticizes materialistic love, and at the same time appreciates selfless love and reciprocal love, because reciprocal love could theoretically be two selfless loves, anonya, that become anonya means mutually interrelated, intrinsically interrelated. Now if somebody steps away, then now it's selfless love from one person, and selfless love from one person to someone who isn't reciprocating, that is loving down. And that's what somebody did for you. They picked you up. They gave you a brain. They helped you see further than you could on your own. They gave you a pair of shoulders to stand on. They let you see further. Like the real experience of interfacing with an elder is that you feel like you're standing on the shoulders of a giant and you can see things you would never be able to see if you had an entire lifetime of trial and error. If you don't have that experience, you haven't actually interfaced with a real elder, with a real mentor. A real mentor, a real elder, doesn't just add a little focus to your life and help you get that extra step. They fundamentally change your perspective of the world and broaden your horizon so much so you feel like you're not even walking on the same planet. Raise your hand if you've had that experience. Yeah, that's why it's a room full of devotees, because we've all had that experience. That's loving down. When somebody loves down to you, then you love up for the rest of your life, because you're repaying the debt. When you meet somebody that's equal and they drop off, then you're just loving down again. And you're just doing for them what somebody else did for you. Somebody new comes in, then you're loving down. You follow? But what do they see? They see that selfless love, so then what do they know they should be cultivating? Selfless love. Can they do that with you? They cannot. But they can do it with everybody else. In this way, we can glorify reciprocal love, we can glorify selfless love, and there's no contradiction between the two. In the same way that if Varangi was to help a beloved devotee leave their body, she would be able to do all the bells and whistles and everything she wanted to do. And the experience would be infinitely more rewarding. But because she was loving someone who was not a devotee, therefore there's a limitation in what you can do. But it doesn't mean it has to be a limitation in your heart. There's a limitation in how you can manifest it for that person without crossing some lines and doing something inappropriate and being like a spaz. You follow? Did that make sense to you guys? Last one was a friend of mine called me today. He's dying of cancer. He's 42, initiated devotee. Got 2 little kids under the age of 5. What a disaster. He's probably got a couple of weeks left to live. He called me today, asked me to read to him from the 6th chapter. I can't for sure say what it's like to die because I'm alive. But I have helped a lot of people die. And so I'm starting to see some common threads. It's tough to let go of your body. And he's like, why can't I just die already? I'm suffering so much. And I just feel like, what am I doing? I'm just laying here waiting to die. I was like, yeah, it's part of what we need to go through to finally let go. Our body has to become suitably uncomfortable that we can eventually cast it off. A woman's cervix has to open before the kid comes out. It seems excruciating, but you just have to, the cervix has to open so the kid can come out. Sometimes there's just stuff you have to go through to ready yourself to make that jump. And it's unpleasant, and it's a rite of passage. So many people have come before you who will hold your hand, but you're going to have to walk that on your own. Anyway, there's also, you have some doubts. It happens naturally for people. He's not like a long-time devotee, so sometimes it's great saints who lived a full life of devotion. No doubts occur. But for younger devotees who pass away prematurely at a young age, with only maybe a decade or 20 years under their belt, sometimes they got to go through some doubts. And that's okay. We got to resolve them. And I've watched young devotees go through this, and they have to reconcile some ideas about the nature of God and the soul and why they're in this world in the first place and what's happening and come to terms with it all. And I've always seen it resolved. Everybody I've ever worked with, I've seen it resolved. But it takes time. You got to just let them go through it. They got to ride. They got to. It's like cathartic. It's like a caterpillar, like a transforming into a butterfly. You just have to let them molt and go through it, and it's cathartic. And be there for them. So he asked me to read to him from the end of the 6th chapter of the Gita, which is where Arjuna says, "I can't do this. It's too much." And further says, what happens if I fail? I want to become a devotee, and if I fail, then I'm just like a riven cloud that just evaporates. It's like a part of a cloud that just gets separated from the main body and just turns into just mist. Arjuna expresses this to Krishna, and Krishna calls Arjuna Tata. He says, "Oh my dear." It's the only place in the Gita where Krishna calls Arjuna my dear. Like my beloved. Tata in Sanskrit is like an extreme term of endearment. Like you would call a child that. It's like, "Oh my dear beloved." Krishna speaks to Krishna in fatherly language. And just makes a really nice point. He says that auspiciousness is never overcome by inauspiciousness. And all that you've done is remembered by Krishna. And he sees the very best in you. And if you have to take birth again, you'll take birth in a family of sadhus, of transcendentalists, and you'll revive your original dormant consciousness, and you'll continue this journey. And you'll reawaken, and you'll have a chance to make further progress. And then you'll make it back. Now that might just seem like a promise. Many scriptures give promises, but of course, an all-good deity would allow you to come back and finish. An all-powerful deity could allow you to do that. An all-good deity would want to do that. An all-powerful deity would allow for that to happen. And so if you can arrive through logic and reason at an all-good and all-powerful deity, which is relatively easy to do, then the statement from Krishna in the Gita isn't a promise that's arbitrarily made in our tradition. It's automatically how a deity would feel and what a deity would do in terms of creating a universe that you can operate in. And so you can move forward knowing that there's no loss or diminution, that you're not going to lose your place in line, that you're not going to lose credit, and you can really sink your teeth into and make your life's work, spiritual growth. And then whatever happens along the way, you can take that in stride. And that's Krishna's loving down to us. Krishna's selfless love for us is expressed in this structure of the universe, in this structure of reality. Which means we've always got at least one person we can love up and be grateful to and dedicate our lives to. And that's Krishna, who's created such a beautiful world, who's created a world full of lessons, who wants to help us, who gives us free will. The world we live in, properly looked at, creates gratitude towards divinity. Even time is your friend. Time is entropy. Time destroys things. It rips them asunder. But that's your friend only because of time, and not just sequential time, but time decaying things. Only because of sequential time that decays things in an entropic way are we motivated to grow, but not forced to. It's a subtle way of encouraging growth without being so authoritarian as to force it. It allows for freedom, but nudges you in the right direction. So you begin to appreciate the specialness of life, the great opportunity you have in front of you. So, to wrap it all up, Varangi was going through a hard time. Kanai asked me to inject myself in the situation, which I did. We had to get through some decoys, some mudding of the water with minor points instead of major points, to the real issue at hand, to how that makes you think about your own life and it's not quite selfless, to an apparent contradiction between deep love and detachment. And we resolve that by pointing out that we're not just materialists who love in a fully materialistic way. Our love is always informed by our value system. It's a higher love. It's a deeper love. And then that leads to challenges like, well, what if I just want that person in that body? Yeah, that's materialistic. You can be a little bummed by it, but if it really presents an obstacle, you've still got some growth to make. Then we looked at love in just sort of a fundamental way, the nature of love. And how if somebody does something for you which is unrepayable, you are indebted to them. And then your love isn't really selfless. It may be pious, it may be good, it may be uplifting for you because you begin to model their selfless love. And you might not be able to do that with them because they did something for you to create the genesis, but you can at least love in the rest of your life like that. You either help other people come up or you find people you can love at the same level with. And when that selfless love is reciprocated, it moves mountains. It's one of the most powerful things in the world. And when it's not reciprocated, it's still one of the most beautiful things in the world. The only beautiful thing in the world, really. It's a spark of transcendence manifested before your very eyes. It's the miracle of divinity imbibed by a devotee manifested towards you. It's God's grace functionally manifested in a practical way in your life. It's God's embrace of you through the selfless love of a devotee who reflects that ultimate love of the deity. And that is what I read to this devotee who's leaving his body. And he had to feel Krishna's embrace because he's getting ready to really let go of this world. And he needs that confidence, and it takes time. And so we start by experiencing the love of devotee. We spend our whole life trying to repay that back by manifesting that love in all of our relationships. And it's not contradictory because if the reciprocal love is two selfless, loving people coming together, it's not contradictory with the principle of selfless love. And ultimately that turns into you being able to appreciate Krishna's love, which has always been there, which was actually what you appreciated in the love of devotee, which is actually what you've been emulating all along, and then it's coming from this original source. And even if we forget and we think of Krishna as a child, it doesn't change. Like the Saraswati River, which invisibly flows through India, the Saraswati, there's a Triveni Sangha, there's a Prayag, Raj, a place where the Ganga, Yamuna, and Saraswati come together. But the Saraswati's been dry for 3,000 years. 4,000 years, 3,800 years. And so we say the Saraswati flows underground. Because you have to bathe at the confluence of three rivers, but one of them's been dry for 4,000 years. It's okay, it's flowing underground. And so Krishna's Bhagavatva, his divinity, even in the Leela, flows underground. So even you love Krishna like a child and love him selflessly, his love for you, his creation of you, his giving you the ability to love, his setting an example for you to follow, that still subtly permeates your very existence. And so it's all Krishna's love, manifested through a devotee, even when we forget in the Leela. It's still Krishna's love that nourishes us like the Saraswati flowing underground. So I had these three disparate experiences in the last 24 hours. And I thought of this thread of continuity that runs through all of them. The last one was Krishna's loving us selflessly and our reciprocating with that. The second one was the general principle of love and the compatibility of selfless love and reciprocal love. And the first one was bringing that miracle of depth into a relationship, a practical manifestation of that Varangi had just gone through. Okay. Thank you, IGTV. Give me some feedback, guys.